Hi everyone, it's me, Lauren Bersalio, and I'm here with another Sunday video vlog. Today, I'm going to be talking a bit on how to prevent eating disorder behaviors. So when we're talking about eating disorder behaviors, first of all, I think it's really important that we remember that eating disorder behaviors are not the problem, they're the symptom. And so what this means is in recovery, it's not enough to just deal with the behaviors themselves, whether that is binging or restricting, binging and purging, whatever the behavior might be. It's not enough to just put an end to that behavior. It's important to deal with the inner issue as well. It's equally or even more important to deal with the inner issue. And because what happens is if you don't deal with the core issue and the root of why you're wanting to carry out these behaviors, why you're wanting to treat yourself this way, then your eating disorder will either continue to come back in forms of relapse, or it will take on different forms in different addictions or different self-harm behaviors. So in the bigger picture, when we talk about dealing with the deeper issue, because that's the actual problem, um, that involves going to therapy and seeking out counsel to figure out what that problem is or what situation it was that triggered your eating disorder to start with, or if it was one incident or multiple incidents, if it's a frame of mind that you're in. In this video, I'm not going to be dealing so much with that. I want to deal with on the smaller scale, with the instance to instance situations. And so when it comes to just day-to-day life and recovery, it's also just as important to remember that your behaviors are simply symptoms of a deeper problem. And so the reason that this is important in preventing eating disorder behaviors and coming up with tactics to prevent yourself from binging or purging or restricting is because it's about more than just not letting yourself purge or not letting yourself binge. To an extent, you can do that. To an extent, it is about willpower and just not letting it happen. But you'll find it's a lot easier if you address the deeper issue in these situations. So I'm going to just go right straight into an example, just to explain what I mean by this. So for example, if you're in recovery and you have this desire to binge on, let's say, a tray of brownies, and you want to eat all of the brownies, and you aren't sure why, you just have this urge. Now you're in recovery, so you don't want to carry out this urge, and yet in these situations, sometimes willpower alone is not enough. And so to simply just keep yourself from the brownies most likely is not going to be a long-term solution. You might be able to avoid it for the next 30 minutes or the next couple hours or even for the rest of the day, but you still haven't dealt with the issue and you still haven't fully learned how to cope without turning to food, because all you've done is you've shut off your coping mechanism, but you haven't replaced it with something healthier. And so an alternative to simply just not letting yourself binge on the brownies is to ask yourself, okay, so right now I'm not hungry, but I feel like binging on these brownies, and ask yourself why that is. What is it that you're feeling? And just take a moment to reflect on that. And so let's say, for example, that you realize it's because I'm lonely. I'm feeling lonely and I want to binge on the brownies. So then go to the next step, which is ask yourself, okay, will eating these brownies help with the actual problem, which is feeling lonely? And it's pretty obvious they won't. Brownies cannot fill a lonely, empty spot inside of you. In a moment when you're feeling lonely, brownies are actually not going to help that problem. So now that you've acknowledged that, and you've acknowledged that the brownies are actually not going to solve the problem, then you ask yourself, well, what will? What will solve the problem that here in this moment I am feeling lonely? And the answer could be call up a friend, or, if your family member is in another room, go and talk to them, send someone an email, do something that's going to be social, that will fill that void that's making you feel lonely, that brownies will not fill. And so then you do that. So then that's what I used to do. So I'd realize, okay, I'm feeling lonely. These brownies aren't going to help me feel any better. They aren't going to solve my loneliness. And so I'll call a friend instead. And then what will happen is, by calling that friend, you have now solved the root problem, which was your loneliness, which means the symptom will go away and you no longer have that desire to binge. And then the same thing will happen if you're trying to avoid purging or even restricting. It's about addressing what you're actually feeling in that moment and then coming up with an actual real solution to that issue and to that problem. So another example could be if you're feeling really stressed out. If the problem is that you're just really stressed out, well, again, overeating or purging or even restricting is not going to solve that. But things that will solve that are activities that you know reduce your levels of stress, whether that's moderate exercise or, for me, I feel all my stress in my shoulders. And so when I'm asking myself, what is it I'm feeling? Well, I'm feeling stressed. Where do I feel that? I feel in my shoulders. Well, binging on an entire pizza is not going to solve that problem, but maybe going into my room, turning on some relaxing music, stretching out my muscles, and taking some deep breaths will solve the problem of being stressed, and therefore I will no longer feel that desire to binge or to purge. And so those are the things that I used to do when I was in recovery, and I highly recommend that you do them as well as a means of cutting off the problem at its source, rather than just trying to use your own willpower to prevent yourself from carrying out the symptoms, carrying out the eating disorder behaviors. So just a quick recap. So the questions that you want to walk yourself through are, what am I feeling? Why do I feel like carrying out this behavior? Once you've addressed that, then you ask yourself, will this behavior actually solve the problem? Which it most likely won't if it involves an unhealthy behavior regarding food. Then you ask yourself, well, what will actually solve this problem? So you come up with a solution and then you carry that out. And sometimes it's helpful, especially in the beginning, to even have these questions written down on a piece of paper. I actually had a form that my therapist gave me. And so to start with, I used to fill out the form every time. And then what happens is the questions get so ingrained in your mind that you start automatically going through that thought process. So I hope that you found this helpful, and I will talk to you guys really soon. Ciao.